Today what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about why you should be on the electronic program guide, the importance of it, some of the issues involved in terms of legal fight that's going on regarding metadata and electronic program guide, and then we'll talk specifically about some practical matters. Tony can talk about his experience that he's had in Barry in terms of getting on the guide.
How we negotiated.
Right, and I think that's the other important thing we want to talk about is the fact that this is a point of negotiation right now in many communities. So before we begin, I just want to get a sense of the room, if I can. How many people, I would take it that none of you are on the electronic program guide. Is that a correct assumption? I'm seeing nodding heads.
Every one of you?
Okay, all right. And then, just to get a sense of the room, how many people are in here in Connecticut? Okay, Massachusetts. Okay, New Hampshire, Vermont, obviously, Vermont. Okay, Maine. Okay, New York. Okay, got it. And then, if you could just bark this out, what are the corporations that you're working with? The cable companies? Comcast, Verizon, Cablevision. Anyone with Charter? Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Well, that gives me a sense of the room too. And that, I mean, I think the thing that's curious is that each of those corporations has a different strategy, I think, and different line about this. So we can talk a little bit about that. So I'll just kind of sit down. And then I guess what we want to do is want to have this be a practical session for your questions and concerns. So stop me or Tony at any point in time during the course of the discussion. But we'll also have a lot of time for your questions in terms of what you can practically do. All right? So let's kind of start this off. I'm happy that you're all here this morning, but there are actually, believe it or not, there are actually members of our industry who don't understand why one would want to have program information on the program guide. So I just want to make sure that you're armed with some knowledge if you're talking with people in your organization about why this is an important effort. Because it is an extremely important effort. Across the country, talking with our members and actually talking with all access organizations, it's like the number 1 or 2 concern that our stations have. Is getting on electronic program guide. And that is specifically because of the way in which viewers find programs today and the way people use television. So the idea that the metadata that describes a program instance is somehow separate from the work that you do, or an add-on or an extra thing, I think is a notion that we want to try to stop. The metadata that is associated with programs on a cable system or a multi-channel video system is necessary at this point for people to be able to find you because of the nature of how audience behavior works here in 2015, and I think we could say as moving forward with audiences, as they've been trained very much to have not to be appointment viewers. Really, only appointment viewing happens with some live instances like sports, worldwide wrestling, town meetings, which maybe are women, those types of things. So really, that sort of appointment viewing only is predominant only for certain types of program instances. But I think if you look at the statistics, it's actually quite startling in terms of the use of digital video recorders and the way in which people, schedule their viewing behavior when they can see things. I think it's something like 40% of all viewing happens through a DVR. So if you think about that for a minute, if you say to yourself, well, it's not important, I don't need to be there, you're saying that you want to leave 40% of the audience on the table. Or you're saying to your partners, townships, individual access users, oh, well, 40% of the viewing audience is not important, which I don't think can be our position. right? And I think the other issue really is sort of a issue of competition. If you want to be found right now in a video environment, you have to be subject to some type of search. Okay? And so most all navigation systems have some type of smart search functionality to be able to do keyword search. And I think it's actually something that viewers expect. So that's the environment that we have to be in, much like, you know, having a stable horizontal line on video, you know, is something that people are accustomed to. Right. Or color information. I know at one point in time there were public service advocates that were arguing against color television because of the cost. Right? But now it's the expectation of our business that, well, oh, actually, you actually see true color on a TV, right? It wasn't always technically the case, but that's the environment in which we're working in. I'd suggest to you that that's the environment that modern television viewers are in, and that we will never be in an environment in the future where there will not be some kind of data associated with video content, right? So those reasons alone should be ones that motivate you to be able to get on the electronic program guide. Or if people say to you things like, well, it seems like it costs a lot of money or a lot of effort to do this, why should we do this? That's the reason why you need to be doing it.
It costs a lot of money.
Well, and we'll get to that in a minute. I think the other thing too to keep in mind is that as you're having discussions with representatives from the cable industry, it's in their interest to make sure that you're not on the guide. Now, why would that be the case? It's because people could actually find you and use you, and then actually there are two separate effects that occur when people watch your channels. One is you build the political power of your organization or your service. And then in franchise renegotiations, if you have the ability to be able to do that, people say, oh, I want to see what Tony's doing. The more that you can be non-existent, the less power you have in renegotiation. So over time, what ends up happening is if the channels can't be found, you become less and less important. And then there's less and less public benefit that needs to be negotiated for, right? So think of this as a war of attrition in some respects in terms of negotiation that has to occur. You need to be thinking about viewership, reach for your access members, for the partners that you have, if you do local production work with community groups. Eyeball competition for the channel is not in the interest, particularly if you know, for example, that cable company has an owned and operated system for local viewership. They don't want more viewers to be on their competitor. So this runs into some anti-competitive questions that we're considering at the national level too. So I'll talk about that in a moment. So I'd also suggest to you that as you're looking at systems for your technical planning, specifically server systems that you want to make sure that you've got the ability to be able to have metadata in those systems to be easily exported out. And that you've got the ability to be able to have some type of negotiation, handshake, or easy technical means to be able to take the metadata out of a program system and be able to export it into these third-party systems. The thing you should understand in terms of the way in which the program guide industry works, typically it's a third-party operator. It's not the cable company or a Verizon or a Comcast or a Cablevision that operates these systems. It's going to be a third-party system that runs the metadata, and actually will be running metadata for many different types of program sources. So the trick is being able to easily export material that's in a server on a regular basis. This also may mean that you need to be thinking about your scheduling a little bit more clearly, and then also you need to be thinking about the types of information that viewers need for a program guide instance. So a title, a one-sentence description, probably some tags in terms of content type. And then also, increasingly important, whether or not the programming is captioned or not is important. Specifically for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, they'll often be looking on the program guide for CC information. And they won't actually look at programming that doesn't have CC information. So that's actually an adjustment, I think, for many of our operations because they hadn't been thinking about schedules. They'd been thinking about just channel capacity and random access to channel capacity. I know there actually are operations that still do program slot lotteries. Does anybody do this here? Oh, it's a great way to abuse your producers. Is to they have like a big ball of ping pong balls every year, and they basically to treat everybody equally. They pull slots and then basically reassign on a yearly basis. It's kind of a crazy system. But when you think about sort of building audience, it's the surest way to make sure that an audience can never find you is sort of the random access of programming. But you're fair to everybody by being unfair to everybody. So that said, as you're making decisions about servers, you want to have that conversation with a provider of whether or not you've got the ability to export metadata specifically to that third-party system that your cable provider has. The good news with some providers is that they have the ability to work with you. Tony can talk a little bit about this. If you're a Verizon customer, if you're on the Verizon system, who's on Verizon? Okay, you will be told that this is physically impossible because of the way in which they've set up their distribution through their wire centers. And this is an issue that we need to be bringing up at the federal level, I think, for a couple of reasons. The first is a sort of question about whether or not program channels that PEG providers run are being treated in an equal fashion with broadcast and other cable channels. And the second question is whether or not the systems that are being built actually specifically support localism. And the general sense that I have in terms of Verizon system is that they don't support localism, and primarily that's because they were built specifically on top of telephone plants, which had been typically regulated at the regional or state level, in some cases multi-state level. So we need to be pushing forward the idea that systems that are being used for distributing video have the ability to be able to embrace local content. If we don't do that, we'll be in a system that basically is top-down. And the entire idea behind having federal mandates or state mandates or local mandates for localism disappears, because the technical systems are built specifically for program providers that are national or transnational getting to the local, as opposed to having any ability to come back up and up and back down. And then the third thing on the federal level that I think that we're going to be looking at, and I can talk more specifically about this, is sort of a consumer justice issue. And it goes a little bit something like this. If I'm a consumer and I pay a PEG fee or I pay a franchise fee and I have expectation for local service and I can't find the programming that I've paid for, something is wrong. And actually that's a sympathetic argument that both elected officials and public policy people in Washington are beginning to hear. Is it's not just the way in which our channels are being treated unfairly, but the way in which consumers are being treated unfairly. So you end up with what is essentially a dual issue, right? A competition issue on our part, where we can't compete for viewership because we're systematically denied access to a fundamental system design function. And then a consumer rights issue where consumers are paying for services that they're not having delivered. And I think that's actually kind of a powerful two-part argument, right? And especially as you're having discussions at the local level about better service of customers to customers and better service for your program producers. The other thing, and Tony could probably speak to this, and I'll turn this over to Tony as I wrap this up. The other thing I find generally is that as you have conversations with the cable industry, you have two responses. The first response from people who work in marketing is, yes, this is a great idea because we want local viewership, right? And actually, when you talk with people in the marketing departments, they'll often, very often, want to begin the conversation of being able to set up that system with you. You talk with government affairs, no, it's physically impossible. Can't happen. We don't do that anywhere in the country. Actually, that's my favorite response. We don't do that anywhere in the country. And I'm here to tell you that what ends up typically happening in a bargaining, we've seen in some franchise negotiations, not with Verizon, but with Comcast particularly, is that something that has become physically impossible suddenly becomes a bargaining chip when a franchise discussion occurs, magically. And that's just because of the way in which the company works. So just expect that as you're working forward. Don't be surprised if the story changes. But I'm also here to tell you that you need to be asking for this, and frankly, you need to be asking for it in writing and getting a response in writing. I cannot tell you how many local groups I've talked to who said, I had a conversation with some guy 6 years ago and they said no. And I stopped. It's like, no, write a letter. Ask for a response within 30 days. When you don't get the response, send the second letter. You have not responded in 30 days. Send the third letter if you have to. Show the documentary proof that the corporation is unresponsive to local needs. You actually need to do that. It can't just be based upon a conversation that you have with somebody over a drink sometime or a phone call. So please, my entreaty to you is ask to be served. Ask for a response. Ask for a cogent response in writing. And when you get a crazy answer, ask for clarification. Right? So with that, I'll just kind of pass things over to Tony. You can talk a little bit about your experience in Barrie.
I want everyone to stand up for a second. Just stretch. We gotta stretch here, guys. You know, when I saw the lineup today, I'm like, really? I'm going up after him? Great. All right, we all can sit down. He's taken 90% of what I was going to say.
I've stolen your thunder.
Totally. He's like, okay, scratch that one off. How many people here are actually negotiating with the cable company? Raise your hand. You're the leads? All right. How many people play poker? All right. Don't assume the person you're dealing with across the table is intelligent.
I did not say that.
I can.
Okay.
I can. Your job is to say no. That's their script. When you negotiate with pay access, this is your script. No. Your job is to persuade them that it's in their best interest to cooperate with you. Because you have something Apple TV doesn't have. you have something that Roku doesn't have. You have local content, which is power. Well, he has the mic. Can I just talk into his chest? This is really a tough room. Where was I?
You ask people to stretch.
No, we did that one 15 minutes ago. Local content, right? And so when I went into negotiations with Charter Communications, I didn't wait for them to send us the proposed contract. We wrote ours 8 months earlier. And the first thing we put on there was internet revenue, HD channels, this, that. Oh, and at the bottom, our information guide. And of course, when they received it, they looked at the first top and they started foaming at the mouth. They're like, internet right now is never going to happen, everything else. And we went down the list, and after 6 or 7 months, and they're spending thousands of dollars on lawyer fees, and I'm kind of dragging my feet, and they're getting the bills, and corporate saying, get it done, settle it. I said, all right, we'll take off internet revenue. And we'll work on HD channels when you hit a certain percentage. And we'll do this and that. And they're like, oh yeah, and we'll give you the information guide. They were exhausted. But I also persuaded them that it was in the best interest for their consumer to have that. And then when I got it, it was like a kid in a candy shop. It is so much fun typing in the information. I have a show called New England Cooks with Carol and Tony, and I put the chef's name in there, and it's our Christmas show. Then they show me a button, and they have different buttons where you could say it's a comedy show, it's a drama, a documentary, and then adult entertainment. And I wanted to hit that button. They're like, no, do not put that for the St. Monica's Mass on there. Ask for the moon. Shoot for the moon. Go for it. But also tell them, like Mike says, the marketing department says, yes, we want it. They need it for their consumer. How many people I've seen QVC? QVC has that information guide. Why? Wolfgang Puck selling knives from 2 to 3 today on QVC. And we hit ours and it says public access from 12 a.m. to 1 p.m. So you gotta have it. But I got it. Now, the people with Comcast says, well, we built our system wrong because we're sharing your footprint with another AMO. So we can't do it.
Access for people not in Vermont, Access Management Organization.
Thank you.
Yeah.
PEG access. So my footprint is just, I don't share it with another PEG access station. That's my area, so it's easy for Charter Communications to say, yeah, we'll give it to you. But for Comcast, they're saying, no, you're sharing too many things. So right now in the state of Vermont, Comcast is going for their certificate of public goods, and they're saying to 90% of our PEG stations, we can't do it because we don't have the technology, it's going to cost us too much. Bullshit. They just don't want to do it. So I told my PEG brethren, identify the PEG stations that aren't sharing and say, all right, go with Brattleboro. They're not sharing with somebody. Go with Springfield, but give it to us. And go in front of the Public Service Board and say, we want it. There was a question.
Yeah, so I just finished a negotiation with Comcast and I asked for the electronic program guide. And basically what they did is they gave me a third party.
Yeah.
Rovi.
Right, correct.
And they gave me a number, I called them and, I got into a little bit of a roadblock because they said, oh, well, we can do this for all the channels, so Comcast should be, you know, I was asking for pricing and all that stuff. So they were looking into, I think they were supposed to get back to me with a response from Comcast on whether they were going to pay for it or not.
Right. So.
Can I answer that?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's just that I got that roadblock and then I got to know the how-tos.
They did that to us. They gave us Rovi. We contacted Rovi, and Rovi says, well, you have to go through Charter Communications. So we went back through Charter Communications and said, okay, guys, you have to set up this account for us, and then we'll send the information to Rovi. And Comcast, the marketing department, says, sure, no problem, no charge. It's, I mean, guys, you just have to play poker. You don't go through the government affairs guy. All right? Go back to Rovi and saying, who do I contact at Comcast? And you contact that person, and that person who don't think is intelligent will say, I'll set up that account for you.
You mean Charter?
No, I think she's Comcast.
And if I can just kind of supplement this a little bit. Yeah. Thank you. Just to hog the mic for a moment. The thing you should understand is that Rovi's not alone. There are other third-party content providers like Gracenote across the country. Rovi is the corporation that Comcast works with that integrates into their systems. Rovi has an agreement with Comcast saying that they will set this up, but Comcast has to say yes. Right? So you have to do this sort of two-party dance or two-party tango. The first thing that we need to be doing is we need to be talking to Rovi to set up the accounts appropriately, and then also know how the data works for the system that they want you to input into. The second thing is to make sure that then they've got the sign-on from Comcast to be able to authorize it. The problem is that the corporations don't really talk to each other. One of the things that I just sort of thinking out loud that I'm wondering if we can be helping to facilitate is to actually have somebody at Rovi who specifically works with local content providers and local PEG operations. That's actually something that I think we can probably try to facilitate so that there's an easier means of access rather than like I've got to find the number that's in somebody's pocket for the guy that I talked to be able to. But that's so you're not alone. First of all, you're gonna have to be persistent because the Rovi people aren't necessarily customer friendly. They don't really have an incentive to be customer friendly because their client is Comcast, not you. And then the third portion is this entire question about who pays for channel insertion, who pays for the program guide insertion. And that's sometimes the subject of negotiation at the local level. We find that it's kind of curious. Some of the providers are saying some crazy things like, the cost of that insertion will stop. CenturyLink, for example, is saying that if they're forced to pay for that program guide insertion, it will stop video deployment across the Twin Cities, which is just kind of a crazy, right? It's like, oh wow, that's going to break the bank. I see, which is just simply not the case. But if you've got the means to be able to pay for the insertion, I think it's worth your ability to be able to do it. And I think the pricing, frankly, is I don't know.
I pay nothing.
You pay nothing right now, right? Right.
Don't say right now.
In perpetuity.
No, we pay nothing, and my programming person, he gets a program from Rovi, and when he's doing our program guides for the newspaper and for our community bulletin board, he just copies and pastes and puts it in the program and schedules. Now, some people say, oh, you've got to do it 2 weeks in advance. No, 48 hours. It's just 48 hours. It's really simple and fun. And it's free for us. Now, do you think they charge QVC? Do you think they charge Turner Broadcast? No, they don't. It's part of their service. So when they sit there and say, we got to charge, you say, all right, show me the invoices to the other cable companies.
Or the other cable channels.
Other cable channels. And they'll say, well, we give it to them. Then why are you charging me? It's not going to break the bank, is it? These guys are fat cats. We're not breaking the bank. We're giving them local content so they can sell their cable system. They can sell their high-speed internet because we're putting our shows, streaming them on the internet. We are selling their services that the other competitors that are coming up don't have. Think of yourself as an asset, not a liability. And with that asset, you need this information guide.
So Tony, I've got a question for you. So when you got on the guide, did it change your program process at all, or change your scheduling process?
No, well, they were like, no, I have to do something more.
Or your staff members?
Your staff members,
Okay.
and I said, yeah, do it.
Okay. Do you have a sense of how much that changed your? how much work is involved now?
No, it's all copy and paste. It's on a computer. I mean, it's like boom, boom, boom. It's just a workflow.
Okay. So some setup time, and then a nominal amount of time working forward.
That's it. But you also have to monitor it because sometimes Rovi goes down. And then you have to, I mean, it isn't something, you just don't copy and paste and send. In your control room, you have your TV, you have your channels on. And all of a sudden, one of your channels goes black. And you have to sit there and go through your procedures and we contact Charter Communications and saying our channel's offline. They go to the head end and they flip a switch saying, sorry, switch went bump. Well, the same thing happens with Rovi. You've got to hit that information guide on your button on your remote and make sure it's updated.
Right. Go ahead.
I'm Mark with Community Voice Channels in Bolton, Connecticut, and we're going through the same kind of issues with Rovi. We've been contacting them, we got the information from Comcast. And Rovi likes to play their games, and we've been emailing them. I've actually tried to go the background and got a phone number from their tech department. So I'm talking to one of the head guys in their tech department who does all this stuff. Like, I'm trying to get hold of you guys. I'm trying to purchase. We're okay with paying for it. And they have not gotten a response.
From Rovi.
From Rovi.
I got that runaround. Well, I got the contact. She was so nice, and said, "Oh, well, let me get to Comcast, and I'll get the right person and that you should be talking to because you really shouldn't be paying for this." And then that was the end of it.
Our rep Comcast gave me the information. He's okay with it. I haven't
Right.
gotten it right yet, but I will.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is now Rovi is just not responding.
So how long has it been?
This has been going since October. And then
So about 30 days or
yeah, a little
so?
over 30 days. We've been contacting back and forth. They just don't respond. I'll just email them, call
So could you do me a favor?
them. Yeah.
Could you write us a letter describing your experience and send it to me?
Yeah.
So there's two things here. One, I think there's probably a conversation to be had with Comcast at the national level about the ability of a vendor to be able to follow through and actually serve program producers. And then there's a second conversation that needs to be happening with regulators. Because what ends up happening is that, specifically in a number of proceedings that have occurred, and actually occurred, I think, in the merger discussions that were happening in the Comcast merger with Time Warner a year and a half ago, was that the entire idea of program guide information was out of their hands because a third party deals with it. But at the end of the day, Comcast has the program contract with Rovi. And then I think and from my understanding too, is that if the data is in that system, you should be able to manipulate it with other playback systems too. So I think there's a long-term strategic advantage for you to be on that system if you can. But could you? I'll make sure that you've got my contact information. I want you to describe the conversation and where you are with it, and frankly, how much time you've spent trying to make sure that you've got the ability to serve your viewers well, right? Because at the end of the day, what's happening is they're draining your resources by being inefficient, right? And we need to document that.
We're going to get to you. Can I ask you, what are they charging you?
Right now, I think, well, we're not paying.
Right.
We're paying for service. I want to say it was somewhere around $700-800 a year.
Okay.
Something in that avenue per channel. Which again, not outrageous because we're looking to grow, we're looking to be more productive and all that kind of stuff. So we're willing to pay them. They are just the whole problem that we're having is just not being no response.
Right.
Constantly going after, once a week, trying to get information from them, and the only person that will answer his phone is the guy who does all the data for Rovi.
Yeah, the tech.
Really nice guy, and he's like, I apologize. He's like, I'm handing it right to my supervisor.
Well, I mean, the more stories I have of that, the better case I can make on both those fronts, right? So, yeah.
So I really appreciated your comments about thinking about structuring the data so that it's consistent and can be easily exported. I'm wondering if one of the questions that we might push for is making sure that we can compel these people to accept feeds so that our systems can export a feed that can be consumed by these services so that, the idea that somebody's having to copy and paste stuff back and forth into web form is ludicrous. If you have the data in a consistent format already, it ought to be trivial to export it in a feed that can be consumed.
And I'm updating, and this is not a commercial for Telview, but I have electronics. And electronics is so full of Band-Aids and this and everything else that I have to copy and paste. And I'm doing a major upgrade December 7th where it's all streamlined. And this gentleman over here has a question, but do you have a follow-up answer for this gentleman?
I mean, I think it's a significant question to be asking equipment vendors, too, as you're making choices and you're trying to determine, how to move forward with procurement, because you don't want to be in a system that doesn't play well with others, right? So necessarily, you need to get the information back out from the corporation or from the third-party vendor. Okay, how does this conform? Because I don't want to be spending all my time with Excel spreadsheets, right? And so I think those vendor solutions are actually out there, but it kind of forces you to be a better consumer in some respects to be able to help do that sort of strategic planning. But we need to get that information back out from industry to help you as well.
Oh, question.
Are we having trouble locally then if we're, some stations maybe paying for the service?
I may not be able to afford that. It should be something that's on there anyhow, as a service to their customers. If Comcast could then come say, well, this town in Connecticut is paying, they're paying in Westford, Massachusetts, you should be paying as well. Are we having trouble in saying that, well, there are people paying?
Mike,
Where do we go from here?
Mike, do you have our CBTV contract up on the ACM?
I don't have that, but I can't put it up there because I've got that.
Yeah, because I think we're willing to share our contract so you can hold it up and say, well, why are you giving these guys Rovi at no charge and you want to charge us? It's like the salesman pitch.
Who are you paying? Is it Rovi or are you paying Comcast?
We haven't got that.
Well, but
But
do
it
you
would
know?
be,
So, I mean, there's a couple layers of response here, Pete. The first is we should be providing you better examples of what's happening in other markets so that you can make the case for your market if you're in a franchise negotiation. Keep in mind that there are 25 states where that conversation can't be had because there's no local franchising. So for those states, we need to be pressing the case on the federal level and probably on the state level that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. The sort of the disparate impact or disparate treatment of channels, one. Two, the fact that consumers pay for these channels and can't find them. Right? So we need to kind of be taking both those approaches. We're already raising those concerns at the federal level in a couple of proceedings that are happening. And this entire question of whether or not we can be seen on the program guide has popped up already in one proceeding at the FCC that had to do with video access for all Americans. But it's also going to be coming up in a couple other proceedings. And we've got some friends on this issue because of the entire question of how independent programmers are treated by larger corporations is sort of a consistent issue. It's not just us. They're actually, this issue pops up for independent channels that are trying to get distribution in different markets. So we've actually have some common cause with some other players too. But we've got to, so we almost have to have that two-pronged case. We've got to give you guys better information to be able to argue for yourselves, and then we need information back from you so we can make the case at either the state or the federal level that this is a disparate impact that needs to be addressed. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but short of that, I'm not gonna, I would not stop you if you wanted to pay for the service to actually reach viewers. I think you need to do that because we can't be waiting till we're in Jerusalem next year, or the year after, or the year after, or the year after. If we try to go for the ideal, we will all be in another business. We need to actually serve people now if we can. Build audiences now, build power at the local level to be able to actually have more impact for your service. So don't stop, right?
You know, you take away my thunder all the time.
One of the things that we've been trying to strive for is by the end of this year to have our channel guide up and running, and that's one of the things that's why we don't mind paying for it. But if we can utilize your expertise and all that kind of stuff, and then I have no problem sharing our information so everyone else knows how we did it.
And that's the key. We have to believe we're a team. We're not islands. We're all in the same life raft together. And I look at projects in the eyes of we can do it. But how are we going to get there? The word can't is not in my vocabulary. It's we can do it. And it's so easy. And so it's the negotiations. The people in the front of the house are sitting across the table. You have to have that attitude that I'm here to win. Because these guys, these government affairs guys, they hate their job. They don't like their job. Because they have to deal with, they have to go to Massachusetts, they have to go to Connecticut, and they have to, but when they come to Vermont, my government affairs guy goes, I love coming to Vermont. When I get back to the office, they're like, you were in Vermont, weren't you? Because he had a great time, because when we negotiate, we don't go for the throat, we go for the deal. We sit there and say, we want you to win, and I want to win. So let's negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit about the experience that I had in St. Paul. We were convinced that Comcast was actually not in franchise compliance because the franchise language in St. Paul was very specific about program guide listings. And I ended up going to Comcast numerous times on this issue. They finally said to me, well, we could do it, but we won't do it because our systems are mapped to be able to sell ads at a regional level. And you know, I just needed to hear that to be able to bring it up as a franchise compliance issue with my local authority, because at that point, you know, they'd said specifically that they were not in compliance with the contract because they wanted to make more money. Okay, fine. I understand the motivation. It's perfectly fine. But this then became, you know, I left St. Paul 2.5 years ago. This then became an issue in the franchise negotiations. And lo and behold, they'll have it in the coming year, finally, because it became a leverage point for franchise non-compliance in the deal, right? But again, it has to be documented. The complaint has to be made up to the authority. You actually need to be armed and ready to be able to get them on non-compliance if they're not complying with the contract. And it doesn't happen unless you actually have things down in writing. That's the other reason, however, they often will not give you things in writing. So you have to be dogged about it and say things like, again, the give me an answer within 30 days, or tell me why you can't. You know, why you can't give me an answer within 30 days. You need to be dogged about that sort of stuff. Let's kind of turn to some questions in the room here, just in terms of how to get started or other concerns. Go ahead.
When you've got the third party that's providing information, say 100 towns that are served by one Comcast at end, and that information is the same on every channel. Nesson's exact same information, HPA's exact same information. Technically, it's just a basic question. How do you then, if each one of those towns has their own pay center, how do they then send individual information to those 100 towns? If everything is the same to all the other towns, how do those 100 pay centers get individual information? That's how they push back.
And my question to them was, House A wants to buy video on demand on HBO, and you can send that signal to House A, but House B doesn't have it. They have the technology to pinpoint. They know exactly what you're watching when you're watching it. And they're saying, well, we don't have the technology. No, it's a game.
So, I mean, I think there is an investment that needs to be made on mapping those systems so that they can actually respond to the program information that comes from the third-party provider, right? And my general sense would be that the corporation is uninterested in spending the money on doing that mapping. Okay.
So they say that they're not capable of doing it now. They might.
No, they're capable of doing it now. The question is whether or not they want to spend the money to be able to comply with doing it now. That ends up being the question. I'll send you a technical study that was done by Lee Afflerbach on behalf of the Alliance for Communications Democracy in the CVAA proceeding that happened in 2013 that specifically talks about this mapping issue. And actually, I think Lee would probably have no problem having that distributed out to people. So if you want a copy of that, I'm happy to send that to you, because basically it sort of describes sort of modern systems mapping and the work that should be done to be able to make sure that they're in compliance. So yeah, there's a difference between saying they're not capable and saying that they're not willing to do it. And just be very clear when you're to ask specifically what they're saying, because it's not physically impossible. All right. So, and then Sue, you're going to say something in the back.
They're all, even in situations where you have multiple. That's what's next. You take Portland, Oregon Metro area, you've got the city of Portland, you've got a whole group of communities around the city of Portland, there's Washington County folks on the other side. They all have EPG, and it's all being mapped, and it's Comcast, okay? So it's, number one, they're totally capable of doing it. Number two, it's really a matter of them being forced or, in one way or the other,
Persuaded.
franchising or whether it's negotiating a contract. In California, there are a number of places because of state franchising, where Fresno, San Jose, a group of places have negotiated agreements with Comcast for EPG coverage. And ironically, what's interesting is that in every one of those cases,
There was a certain price that was supposed to be paid up front and then annually. Comcast has never, they've never been billed after the first year. They paid the first year and then they've never been billed since. So it's really not even about the money when you get right down to it. It's about the principle of it and the sort of snowballing effect that they don't want to have happen if everybody else finds out that, number one, they're capable of doing it, number one, they can do it. And you just have to be, don't be naive about this stuff. You really just have to dig around and find the information, what other people have done, and how it's worked. Tony and Mike are both saying that. That's really the key. And then just, like Tony says, kind of just say, well, we have a great product, okay? And we have a product that with the shrinking of newspapers and local news availability, it's kind of only available from us. So, I mean, the arguments these guys are all making are great.
I'll forward that study to you if you give me your contact information. And actually, if anybody wants a copy of that, I don't think we will have any problems distributing that. So let me know. I mean, what do you?
No, I was just going to say this.
It's a public document at this point, right? Yeah, you could find it on the FCC search. It's a publicly filed document, but we'll send you a PDF so you don't have to kind of spend all your time kind of digging around for that.
This young lady.
We've been sending our guide, our information over our cable providers, Cablevision, and we work with Greystone. But for years we've been having some issues which seem to get worse when we acquire our EG channel. And it was, oh yeah, we'll put the information up, and then they pull back and like, oh no, we can't really, so we have to do it for everybody, it's a big technical problem. But now they're really worse about things. We send them all the information, and they've been posting another township schedule in our area, so it's never accurate because they're never actually posting what we're sending them. And they're in complete denial. We can't get an answer from anyone as to like why this technically is happening. And and the consumers call Cablevision, complain about it, and then they tell them we're not sending the schedule at all, and that's why it's not accurate. And it's the constant run around, the constant circle.
Like Mike says, you need to document it. And I always found when
What community?
Cablevision. I always found when I send an email and I CC like 20 other people, they know that I'm documenting and other people are seeing my questions, and I always get an answer back really quickly. So make sure you CC and they know that but you have to dog them.
But let me see if I understand what you're describing. So you were getting insertion on a regular basis for your channel, and then they withdrew it?
No, they switched other content information from their township.
Using like the township over, we're not really sure exactly whose schedule it is, but they're putting that schedule in our viewing areas. So they're not actually seeing our schedule, seeing another township. They have
How long has that been going on?
quite some time now. It has been,
A month?
It's been like
3 years?
It's been a few years. We've been getting run around in circles. It's been a bit of a problem trying to convince my higher ups that this is an issue we need to help.
Sure, okay.
Well, this should also be an issue because Cablevision is about ready to be law.
Yes.
This needs to become documented.
Yeah, so I mean, there's two things here. One, it's in your interest to document this, and please let me know about it, so I can talk about this with other policymakers in DC. But like lack of compliance issues with the Cablevision contract is something that's can legitimately be brought to the New York Public Service Commission. So you probably, as they're being considered as a merged entity with Altice. Everyone knows about this, right?
Yep.
Yes, you know about the Altice takeover of Cablevision. Yes. No. So Altice is like the largest European cable provider, and
they hate regulations.
Yeah, and they are entering into the United States market. They are purchasing Suddenlink, which is a small operator that's based in a number of states out west. They've now made a merger acquisition offer on Cablevision. And actually that transaction will be reviewed, both at the state and the federal level. But that lack of compliance that Cablevision has should be documented.
They used to not even permit us to have direct contact with Greystone. They were like, you just send them the schedule, you don't talk to us. But we overstepped that. Once we started communicating with Greystone, we realized
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, but I mean, but that's the story we need to tell, right? I mean, because the story that gets this, and I guess the other thing I would just tell you is that the story that gets told is, oh, well, you know, these local channels, you know, they're just a bunch of, they're just, you know, it's all just sort of, you know, amateurs, and they're not really interested in reaching audience, and you know, they're not really interested in program guide information, and they never ask, and they're not really technically adept, and you know, they're not sophisticated, and you know, it's all right. We don't really need to be concerned about this thing, and I'm here to tell you that that's just wrong, right? The work you do needs to be seen. The work of producers in your community needs to be seen. The you know, the vital civic information that local governments provide needs to be seen. Okay, and the fact of the matter is that in many communities you've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in intellectual property that's being shortchanged. Right? So you should be thinking about those terms. Talk in those terms about the fact that your local communities or your local corporations have been shortchanged by this, right? And it's been undervaluing your properties. Then they start to sort of wake up when you start talking that way.
And we're going to get to you in a second, but one of the things that we, in Vermont, we did an inventory on how many employees we have in the public access community. And in Vermont, we employ full and part-time 185 people. It's larger than the local public television. It's larger than the biggest CBS affiliate. We employ a lot of people. And when you sit there and say, you're going to be damaging us and trying to put us out of business, you're putting 185 people out of business, out of work. And that's when your local legislator sits there and says, really? Yeah. You got to start playing the politics a little bit. He has a question.
I'm new to this because I formerly worked for BNN, but now I'm an access framing app, and I come from commercial television in Boston. So what I'm curious is there a site that is aggregating all the issues for community access where information is being shared? So when we're negotiating with the cable companies, we can go do our due diligence, get that information, and demonstrate. Like there's a guy who applied, you know, from Oregon. He's the one who told me that the EPG was out there, and you know, and we just had a meeting or call it a negotiation, but with Comcast.
Yeah.
And you know, what I'm hearing here is what they're doing, which is exactly, you know, no, maybe until June rolls around. And I also know in DC, they're just trying to become an OTT, so they're not even dealing with the Cable Act anymore, and the obligations and regulations.
So, yeah.
Okay, so if they get a different classification, they're hoping that all goes away.
Well, that's an interesting discussion, but yeah.
Okay, so my question is there one place to say, we got case studies, I'm hearing everybody's, you know, testimonials as far as what they're dealing with, and, you know, we may have differences as, you know, it relates to each town, but it seems like everybody's having the same problem at a different level.
I can answer for Vermont. It's called the Vermont Access Network. Google that. We have all our testimony online. We have our CBTV's contract online. We have, you testified.
Yep.
And so go there. And you're a member of ACM?
So in the coming year, you'll have that resource on our website.
But right now, go to Vermont Access.
And then the other thing I would tell you is that there's a number of people who work in the industry who've collected sort of sample franchise language that you can find. You know, Sue Buskey's got some information, but there's a host of people like that. But you know, my intention is that you've got that in terms of like case studies, best practices, white papers that we provide you. That'll be starting in the coming year, right? Yeah. And then the other thing I would just tell you is that you know, we want to be that resource in terms of either connecting you with best practices or successful stories. So if you want to find out more about being a member, I'm happy to talk with you about that and just kind of connect you with people too.
And do you know that there was just a hearing at the State House in Boston?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of the, actually I hope that gets discussed at some point here, but I am familiar with that discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Questions? Oh, we got one.
I'm in the midst of a contract with Comcast and Verizon. Two-part question. Anything on the Verizon front?
Verizon is bad on this question, and it's because
What aren't they bad?
yeah, well, so the thing I would tell you is that you've got to do a dance between the two of them. And you need to be concerned a little bit because Comcast will try to put in a sort of language that would reduce their obligations if Verizon doesn't provide something. So you need to have technical language in the contract about equivalency to other channels. And then specifically, you know, the program guide listings are described at the program guide instance, so that it can't be seen that it's just like sort of the blanket public access programming as being compliant with the language. So you need to be very specific in the language in that. But the only concern I would have is that in competitive markets where Comcast and Verizon work, Comcast seeks to lessen their obligations to match Verizon, right? So you need to find a way to
Do they really kind of play one off the other?
yes, yeah, that's a common strategy.
That's
Yeah, and actually, it's not a bad strategy if it's actually a good reason to have the contracts not be coterminous.
Pardon?
It's a good reason to have the contracts not be expiring at the same time, actually. Well, okay. I'm sorry. But I mean, so yeah, but it's a common strategy, frankly. You know, the issue with Verizon, oh, there you go.
Thank you. My arm fell asleep.
I love the spirit of technical innovation that infuses this conference. Yeah. So the issue with Verizon specifically on this issue is that they laid their physical plants over their wire centers, and they do not want to do any more investment in their physical plant at all. And so this is like a compliance issue we probably have to take up at the federal level.
And let me just interject. What you want to tell Verizon, you want to hold out, how should I say this, a nugget. You got to remember, our content is king. We are providing something that their competition doesn't have, and we're not going to share it with their competition unless their competition gives us more money. You know, you guys got to remember, you have something that's valuable. And you got to go in there with that in your mind saying, guys, we're a partner with you. We're giving you something that your competition doesn't have. All I need is this and this to make it better for the consumer, where you're going to sell more services and make more money. That's the end of our show.
Other questions? Yeah, sorry, quick.
So we are currently Comcast, but we're also on ACM EPG.
Got it.
Have you had any experience with that?
Bad experience.
Because in Connecticut, the whole state's on one channel.
Yeah.
How can you ever get on?
So, I mean, that's the substance of the federal complaint against AT&T. It seems to me that Frontier bought that system without understanding what they were buying, because their strategy has been to sort of buy other systems, legacy systems that, like Verizon are giving up. So you're actually seeing them purchase sort of older systems that other companies are getting rid of to be able to kind of get into the market. You need to raise the issue with them, but I think we need to probably expand the concern that we have that was expressed in the UVerse petition that came forward in 2009 that still is waiting, right? Because that system has that system has not changed, even though Frontier is just operating it, right? So the issues have just simply been given to a new corporate owner. Jim, were you going to say something, or? And I know that the concern about this was raised with the Connecticut Regulation Board when the transfer occurred. I think that there was, and someone else, maybe Jen Evans can correct me a little bit on this. There was some sort of amelioration, sort of attempt at ameliorating the problem, but I can't remember what it was because I'm not really conversant with what's going on with Connecticut law. Yeah, there was some kind of settlement in Connecticut, but I'm not sure what it was. But Jen has specific information about that, and she was at the registration table this morning. You could talk with her more specifically about that because she and PUA actually were involved with some of the discussions when the transfer was occurring. But our issues that we have with UVerse across the country still pertain to that system. Now what do they call it here? Do they still call it UVerse, or?
Frontier.
It's just called Frontier. Do they brand the product in a certain way?
They just took it over. It's got the Buffalo logo.
Buffalo.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
But it's the delivery of the channel. You're not surfable through it.
Yeah. No. It's the same technical issues that we. Yeah. It's exactly. I mean, and the thing that's curious about this is that CenturyLink, which is expanding its market in a number of cities out west in the Midwest, it actually has, they have no problems with HD distribution for PEG channels, and there's no technical issue with getting the material through Grace Note. It's just a question of the franchise discussion. So, who pays is the nub there with CenturyLink. And then the thing that I understand from talking with Google is that Google is more than happy to provide the program guide information because they actually want consumers to find things. They're a very strange company. They actually like our product because in talking with them, they say that, and they've studied PEG actually.
All right, let's go to Google.
Which is kind of creepy. It's kind of creepy that they studied us, but the thing they say is that our content is very sticky, right? So may not be wide in terms of distribution, but the people who are with us and care deeply and watch a lot, which is actually very valuable. And so the question ends up being how you can widen the approach. And I think having that program guide information is clearly one of the ways. But yeah, but talk with Jen a little bit about this, and then I think there's a deeper discussion to be had about.
In your negotiations, just say on the side, saying, "Oh, we've been talking to Google." That might scare them.
Go ahead, and then I'll get to Pete. Go ahead.
My question is, right now, as you know, and as some know, and maybe all of you, the city of Yonkers is a metropolitan city that does not have a community media space for a television studio, a facility. And I find it very, unacceptable for someone to have to tell me to, go up to Peekskill somewhere to get training or whatever. Point being said, the negotiation with the franchise agreements with FiOS and Cablevision. By the way, we have to mail all of our show DVDs down to Reston, Virginia in order to air on the FiOS, okay? I have to mail, right? And it has to be a certain DVD format because they're not even so up to date. They'll send it back if it's not able to read the DVD. But that's not even my point. It's part of it, but it's not my main point. My point is that we do have a channel in the city of Yonkers that shares with Harrison and I think Portchester, but Cablevision runs it. My thing is, we're in the 6th year of the contract. It's a 10-year contract. I have both the contracts. I have FiOS, I have both the franchise agreements, FiOS and Cablevision. And looking at them, we're coming down to like, it's a 10-year.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, and I heard someone say, and I came in a little late, is that they offered to me, because I've been challenged with them getting a facility for almost 5 years now, since I've been a resident there. And I'm not gonna give up. As a matter of fact, we just had a intergovernmental committee presentation, and Mary Ann came down, and myself, it was 3 of us that presented, and guess what? They said that they're gonna put a committee together, and they offered $100,000 for a startup. I don't know what any of that means, because I don't know what I'm doing.
So I think let's talk more about that here today. I mean, I know that'll be the subject of discussion that we have at 10:35.
Okay, so then don't worry, I'll
So, but I think we want to try to find a way to be able to help leverage and for the situation there.
Please,
10:35 on page 12.
Okay.
Yeah, but and I think we're going to be in this room.
Thank you.
So after we do a break, or actually we'll be in A. So yeah, and actually, Jim and Sue will be able to take care of you too. So
We have like 4 minutes left.
Pete, you're going to.
Yeah, really quickly, do you see any change in, work with a lot of the different cable operators? We've all been saying for years, I've said, we're providing something that they should be embracing in their sales techniques and tools to try and keep people on cable television. Why are they not doing it? Are you seeing any sort of a change to say, hey, well, maybe we ought to embrace these guys, they are providing something that gives benefit?
So, I mean, my experience in the Twin Cities was that Comcast had an appreciation of the local channels that they could actually document viewership. So it's curious. You talk to Mike Johnson, who runs a 9-channel consortium, or 9-city consortium in northwest suburbs there. His deal went very, very swimmingly. They got HD, they got electronic program guide insertion. They're kind of moving forward with, a whole host of things now. But it's because at the end of the day, he had viewers and he had also political support. Right? So those two things I think are still going to be drivers in our work. It's not clear to me what's going to happen when you have some of these newer entrants coming into communities. I know that, for example, an operator like RCN is looking to try to be sort of a third player in some markets. They might have an effect on this, and they actually might be coming up with some good deals to support local communities. That might put some extra pressure on the incumbents. And we're actually seeing that in the DC area, probably see that in the Boston area a little bit. And then I think the other thing that you just have to realize too is that they're going to continue to be investing in the OTT market. And so the open question to my mind is if there'll become a tipping point when they walk away from their business, the traditional cable plan. And what they're doing is they're selling straight up broadband, and you are sort of nickel and dimed on your video choices through OTT. And I think that's probably what the model's going to look like, and then they'll have a cable product.
Is that still considered offering a service of channels?
Well, this ends up being the interesting point. So, like Comcast's Stream product is a cable service. It's a skinny bundle that rides on top of the broadband. Why is that a cable service? I think it's because they want to pick and choose the content, and they don't want to be subjected to net neutrality provisions.
If it's a broadband service, they're subject to net neutrality provisions. And then suddenly you've got all sorts of things popping up in terms of data management and content agreements and the like that they don't want to be getting into. So I think you're going to
locals on the OTT.
Well, this is the question. This is precisely the question. So, you know, as they're starting to service in the Boston area, I think it's going to be an interesting point. We're probably getting a little off base from our topic area for this. And I think they're starting to service in Chicago. It's a question I've got for the Chicago operations as well. Is yes, they're going to have broadcast. Where's pay? Because it's a cable service. So I think that's going to be an emerging battle in 2016.
Which is why I've been arguing that we need to launch our own access.
Sure. Launch our own access.
Are you guys happy?
Was it useful? Okay. Again, let me know if we can be of assistance. I've got cards here. I'm going to take a break, and then we're going to get started in a few minutes with the next session on regulatory work.